Okay, ready when you are. All right, thank you everyone for being here for the first EER seminar of the winter semester. So I hope everyone's semester is off to a great start. I'm really excited to introduce Becky Matz here today, who's a senior research scientist in the Center for Academic Innovation here at the University of Michigan. Really looking forward to your talk, and thanks again for joining us.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me. Thanks for letting me help kick off the new semester. It's very busy out there. There's no parking spaces anywhere, so it's like you can feel the buzz. So thanks for having me. My name is Becky, and I work in the Center for Academic Innovation, and the project I'm going to tell you all about this afternoon is a collaboration with a bunch of fine folks over there as well, Mark, Holly, Ben, and Kate. I thought I would just introduce myself or just give you the short version of kind of how I got here, like how I came to be at the Center for Academic Innovation. I started my sort of career in chemistry. I wasn't really thinking about education at all. I came here for grad school in 2007, and at the time was really just thinking about my bench work and not thinking about education at all. But there, at the time, there was a lot of flexibility in my coursework and like the coursework program that I was in, and so I took a couple of classes in the School of Ed, and found those topics to be really interesting, and kind of ended up biting on a small project there that you would call a chemistry education project, and so at the time when I was finishing my degree, I was kind of choosing between like a wet bench route and then more like this teaching and learning route. And I ended up doing a short postdoc at the Teaching and Learning Center here, CRLT, which I'm sure is very familiar to many of you. And after that, I went up to Michigan State as basically a like non-tenure track research associate sort of person for about 7 years. And I was there until I decided I wanted to come back to Michigan, and was lucky to get the position that I have now about 3 years ago in 2020. So I've sort of matured over the years from somebody who does chem ed to somebody who does bio ed, science ed, STEM ed more generally, and now in the Center for Academic Innovation, I usually characterize myself as somebody who kind of, Center for Academic Innovation, among other things, houses a bunch of educational technology software tools, one of which is Tandem, which you probably heard about, and another of which is eCoach, and there's all others, a bunch of others that you might come across either as a GSI or as a faculty member or as an instructor or whatever. So eCoach, Tandem, and Atlas, and Gradecraft, and a whole bunch of brothers and sisters of theirs. And my job is basically to kind of wander around that portfolio of software tools and try to find interesting education research studies to do in and among them in those spaces. So the paper that I'm going to tell you about today centers on one of those tools. It's called eCoach. It's been around for about a decade. It's a middle schooler at this point, I guess. It's like 10 years old or 12 years old. And I'm going to tell you about some tailored nudges that we implemented with them in a couple of different courses, including some courses relevant to the College of Engineering. And this paper, or this project, this slice of this project is relatively mature. We submitted a paper on it over the summer. We got revisions on it in the fall, and we resubmitted those last month. So I was hoping I would have like an accept decision letter or whatever by the time this presentation started, but alas, here we are. Okay, so I'm going to start just with talking about leaving, which is sorry, I don't know how to click, left click on this computer. Okay. So talking about Leaving Revisited is a report that came out in 2019. It provides a pretty good summary of the current state of affairs in STEM education, and it's an update to a pretty keystone report that was done in 1997 by Seymour and Hewitt. But it really shows pretty similar trends in the problem iceberg, if you will, in undergraduate STEM education. And prominent in the list of concerns there on the right-hand side is, and this is both for students who stay in STEM degree programs and students who leave STEM degree programs, but prominent in the list of their concerns is discouraged or lost confidence due to low grades in early years. And so, there we go. And the Talking About Leaving Revisited study found that this factor actually increased in importance between the 1997 and the 2019 report. So this is, it's a persistent kind of idea that as if you can call STEM a discipline as a whole, I mean, STEM is sort of just a funny acronym that is, anyway, blah, blah, blah. STEM is a collection of disciplines. And in contrast to humanities disciplines or social science disciplines, as a collective, we have basically agreed for over the last 100 years to give lower grades than other disciplines. So as a matter of course, STEM disciplines essentially typically give lower grades than other disciplines do. So in comes an idea, mastery-based grading. I'm using the words mastery-based grading here, but you might substitute this for whatever your favorite term is, specifications-based grading or standards-based grading or ungrading or any kind of form of alternative grading. Forms of alternative grading have shown promise at addressing some of these challenges that students face, especially in large introductory courses. Standards-based grading has really kind of grown its roots in K-12, at the K-12 levels, and it has really only become more prominent in higher ed in about the last 10 to 15 years, so it's kind of growing here. So in contrast with typical points-based systems, mastery-based grading attempts to center student progress in relation to demonstrated understanding of learning objectives. A really key point is emphasizing the importance of learning through struggle and revision without penalty, or with much, much smaller penalties than are typical of points-based systems. Prioritizes collaboration over competition, which is not exclusive to a mastery-based or alternative grading kind of system, but it is sort of a key emphasis, if you will. And the idea is that all students can succeed when properly supported. So all students, might be able to earn an A or could be supported in earning an A, and that kind of idea. Mastery-based grading has been correlated with student achievement gains in several disciplines. We've seen it in math, we've seen it in chemistry, we've seen it in physics. I'm sure there's other studies out there that I'm not aware of. There's other disciplines I'm sure to add in this list. And I think it's fair to say that interest in mastery-based grading or its alternative forms is on the rise, specifically at the higher ed level. And so one way to sort of demonstrate that is, or to reify that is, there's this interesting new conference, relatively new conference called the Grading Conference. It was started by a couple of faculty from Grand Valley State University who have their roots in mathematics. And it only began in 2020. They had, of course, planned prior to the pandemic and then went online. I believe every conference has been online now since that kind of beginning. It's had a higher ed and STEM focus for all of these years, but you can see even in 2021, they actually had they had so much interest, they had a split conference. So they did one kind of like half conference on higher ed STEM and the other on middle school and high school contexts. So that's a community that's growing. Their communities Slack space has also been growing hand over fist over the last few years. It's got upward of 2,100 members as of this morning, and they're calling for nominations to the program committee for this summer event. Anybody's really interested and wants to dig in on mastery-based grading. Okay, so the study that I'm going to tell you about today was done on an intervention designed to improve student behavior with respect to one of these really key aspects of mastery-based pedagogy, which is the opportunity to make multiple attempts on course assessments and improve over time. So the study covers a few different courses that have different edges. Their details are sort of different, and I'll go through a few of those details. So what I'm showing here is just an example assessment timeline where an assignment opens on a Monday and closes the following Tuesday. So this intervention, these nudges, they were a short series of personalized reminder emails, and they were conceived of as these behavioral nudges. So in this example, the first nudge was sent on a Thursday, but the key factor being 5 days ahead of the due date. So a handful of days ahead of the due date. And the second nudge was sent 2 days ahead of the due date. I want to share a little bit about the concepts of behavioral nudges and nudge theory here. So behavioral nudging is a concept, it's really got its roots in econ, and it describes these subtle and low-cost changes in environments that help to promote some desirable action, whatever that action may be. And the definition of nudges is often drawn from the work of Thaler and Sunstein. They have a book from, I think, 2008. And they summarized nudges as choice architecture that alters people's behavior in a predictable way without forbidding any options or significantly changing their economic incentives. And the point is essentially, in the face of, our cognitively limited selves, that nudges can just make some choices more salient. So, for example, when produce is swapped, for candy and chips at the grocery store or near the cashier at a grocery store, that improves the rate at which it's purchased. And it's because it's right there and you're getting your wallet out and you're ready to pay and you're like, yeah, I'm hungry, maybe I'll eat a banana now. Even like the grocery store layout itself is a nudge. So when you walk in, you first see fruits and vegetables because they're gorgeous, right? And they're colorful and they're beautiful. And they make you feel like you're walking into a healthy place and you're about to make healthy choices, right? You would feel really differently if you walked in and you saw canned food and cereal at first, and the produce was all, at the back, or not at the back, but if you picked up produce last, that would make more sense. Produce is delicate, right? It's perishable. It would make a lot more sense to put non-perishables in your cart first, things that are heavy. But that's, grocery stores are laid out in a way to nudge you to feel like you're making healthy choices when you're going to a grocery store. And so you end up spending more. And the idea that the milk and the eggs are a mile away is also the same kind of idea. So nudges are low cost. They're intended to be non-coercive. They're intended to be easy to ignore. They leave autonomy with the person who's exposed to the nudge. And so one of the things that has come up, in the course of doing this study and in thinking about nudging in education is extra credit is often used. We might think extra credit is a nudge. You want to use extra credit to motivate some kind of particular behavior out of students. But extra credit is an economic incentive in the realm where points are, these quantitative things and, end up adding up to students' final grades. So I would say that extra credit does not really qualify as a nudge. It's more of an economic incentive than nudges are meant to be. And we do see that small changes to learning environments can yield positive outcomes. And there's a review here, reference at the bottom, by Matt Damgard from 2018. That's it's called Nudging in Education. It was the first review that I could find on nudging in education. So kind of speaking to this idea of nudging being a bit more nascent. And she shows how, like I say, small changes to learning environments have been shown to yield positive outcomes in a lot of different scenarios. And her review doesn't cover just students, but also instructors and even parents. She goes into, again, the K-12 world. Okay, and within the typology of nudges that review lays out, we kind of land in this upper right-hand corner. The current study lands in this upper right-hand corner because the nudges, which I'll describe in a minute, are additions to students' decision environments, and they're in the context of students, we think, active choices about when they're going to do their assignments and how many times they'll attempt to improve their scores, if at all. Okay. So a bit about study details. So we drew from 3 different contexts, 3 different introductory courses, a pre-calc course where we first implemented the nudges in fall 2020, and then 2 different, what I'll refer to as just computer science or programming courses, one targeted at specifically at engineers and one broader. So we have 11 terms total, 5 in math and 3 in each of the others. And you can see the total numbers of students there. And the 2 computer science courses, those nudges began to be implemented in fall 21. So the data for this study go basically from fall 2020 through fall 22, so 3 fall terms and 2 winter terms. So I'm going to contrast, well, you'll see in the nature of the nudges were similar in both flavors of the computer science course. So, so that's why I'm describing them together here on this slide. But I'll start with math on the left. So in the math course, a typical semester would have 10 mastery assessments, each that were open for about a week. And students would receive an overall progress report after their 4th assignment. So they would get like okay, here's how you've done on your first 4 assignments. And if you continue to do like that, here's what you should expect with respect to your mastery assessments overall by the end of the semester. There was an architecture, if you will, to who received or didn't receive the second nudge. So remember in that timeline that I had, you got it, the first one 5 days ahead and the second nudge 2 days ahead of the deadline. The students who received the second nudge were only those who hadn't yet earned a passing score. So out of 5 points, the students who hadn't yet earned a passing score, they were getting 0s, 1s, 2s, or 3s. And a similar kind of setup, we had a similar kind of setup in computer science where generally there were about 6 projects over the course of the semester. The timeline on those was a bit longer. They were open for about 2 weeks. Students did not have a progress report there, but they did also, they similarly had a cutoff for nudge 2. So, and there the cutoff was 70%. They were scoring projects out of 100%. So students who had greater than 70% or greater would not receive the second nudge. Okay, I want to share a little bit more about the rationale for implementing nudges in these particular courses. So in the first semester, that mastery-based grading was used in the mathematics course. We heard from instructors that students really weren't taking advantage of this structure. So students were still waiting to make their first attempt on an assignment. They were waiting for many days. They were kind of treating the assignment more like a quiz. They wanted to do really well in one attempt. So instructors thought, okay, maybe the students are procrastinating, or maybe they're waiting till they could think they would get a perfect score. So the nudges are intended to help encourage students to make their first attempt earlier, regardless of what score they think they'll get. Give students feedback on their current score and the number of days remaining, and then adjust norms so that an initially low score is not like this like dagger. But instead, an initially low score is still seen as like, okay. And then these goals were kind of expanded to the computer science courses as well. But they sort of began, the nexus of those was with math. Like I said, the intervention, the nudges here were all implemented with this software tool called eCoach. It's a software platform that was already in use in all 3 of these courses. And I'm not sure how familiar you aren't with eCoach, but it's basically a web-based platform that attempts to support student success in particularly in large courses where like one-on-one communication between the instructor and the student is like difficult, if not impossible. So eCoach integrates a bunch of survey responses and prior performance metrics and information about the course itself to provide tailored messages to students. So there's like a big component of eCoach is this thing called the exam playbook, and it's basically a metacognitive intervention to help students think about what they'll use to study, why they'll use those things to study, and then it has a reflection component after the exam too. So I can talk for many more hours about eCoach, but for the purposes of this study, it was essentially our like nudge delivery vehicle. Okay, so the first nudge sent 5 days ahead of the due date was sent to all students, included information about students' current score, their remaining attempts, number of remaining attempts. So they were limited in their number of attempts they could make per day, and included some tailored feedback. So for example, a student who already by nudge 1 had made several attempts and earned low scores will get some advice like, okay, hey, maybe you should try going to office hours by this point. So a couple of examples. They're pretty short, really short emails. You might get, you haven't started yet, or you've got a 3 out of 5 and a reminder about which scores get credit, how many attempts you have remaining, and then a little tip at the bottom that would be tailored either based on the number of attempts or the score they had already gotten, or, I think those are the 2 elements. Nudge 2, sent to not yet passing or less than 70% scoring students. again, including the current score, number of remaining attempts and tailored feedback, and again, differentiating by like you haven't started or you've made one attempt or you've made several attempts. And I have a couple of examples of those as well. These messages were sort of stylistically looked a little bit different than our typical kind of eCoach messaging does. They were intended to be very, very, very short and almost more like a text, although we were still emailing them to students, but we have some kind of future questions or future thinking to do about whether we are making them more similar to nudge ones or kind of keeping them in this format. Okay, we're going to spend a lot of time, several minutes on this slide. So I know it's like ugly and overwhelming, but we're gonna park here for a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to begin to show you some of the results from this multi-level modeling and really Mark was the lead on the modeling. So he helped us all along in understanding what was going on. And the results that I'm going to show you at first are all you can think of as the effect of the first nudge. So we have nudge 1 and we have nudge 2. All of these first results are really about the effectiveness of nudge 1, aggregating over all of the conditions of nudge 2. So nudge 2 might not be sent to a student. A student might be sent nudge 2 and not view it, or a student might be sent nudge 2 and view it. Okay, I want to explain 2 quick controls that we have in the models first. One is this GPAO, or grade point average in other courses metric, that we, as researchers, will often use as kind of a control metric for prior performance. You can essentially think of it as a student's college GPA, and there's a few little edges on the details there, but it's essentially a student's college GPA. And we centered the variable at 3.0. We purposefully centered at 3.0. That's 1 standard deviation below the mean in this population, so that we would be interpreting our results for a population that is more relevant rather than a student with a GPA of 0, which essentially doesn't exist. So centered at 3.0, we see that this is a significant variable in the model. So every 1 unit increase in GPAO tracks with a 9% increase on their mastery-based assignment score. So that tracks, right? That makes sense. The other control variable that we used is what we call email engagement, or you could think of this as eCoach email engagement. It is eCoach email engagement. So students who are getting their email, these like nudge emails, the emails look like they're from this eCoach system, but those are not the only emails that eCoach is sending them throughout the semester. There's emails around this exam playbook thing that I mentioned. There's an email at the beginning of the semester and the end of the semester, and when salient deadlines in the class come up, they're getting other emails, and there's a whole set of like bonus institutional knowledge kinds of tips that students can either choose to opt into or not. So there's a whole range of other emails that students are being sent. And we thought that the extent to which they read those other emails, like the extent to which they ignore or don't ignore eCoach emails, we thought would be a salient factor here. So this email engagement you should think of it as eCoach email engagement, or non-nudge related eCoach email engagement, which is kind of wordy. But that's what it is. And again, we centered it at 50%, which is again 1 standard deviation below the mean. It wasn't significant, but probably because that behavior of either reading a lot of your email or not reading a lot of your email is kind of already captured in the very powerful GPAO metric, which, just as a side note, like far and away, we always see as like, how you do in your other courses is like the far and away best predictor of how you're going to do in any current course. Okay, so what do we see? So the intercept here is 78%. So we interpret this as a student who is 1 standard deviation below the mean with their GPAO, and 1 standard deviation below the mean in their non-nudge eCoach email engagement, earns about 78% on average on their average mastery-based assignment when they don't view any nudge. The effect of the nudge is we see is significant and 3%. So we see a significant effect of viewing the nudge on assignment scores for those students, such that those who view them earned about 3% higher scores than those who don't. This is modest, Okay, but this is also an email. So like, how many emails do we get? Like, if every email that you got could increase your scores by 3%, like, pretty good. So, modest, but we think still materially significant. In this interaction between viewing or not viewing nudge 1 and GPAO, we see a significant parameter. So we see that the effects of the nudges on the assignment scores interacted significantly with GPAO. And I have a little chart to show that a bit better. Again, for the average coach and the average assignment. So what you can draw this interaction with essentially this chart and see that nudges were having a larger impact on the students with the lowest GPAOs. And based on this result, so we can conclude that for the average assignment, for the average coach, we use coach to refer to the combination of the term and the course. So we have 11 coaches in this study. So for the average coach, for the average assignment, nudges are especially beneficial to those students with the lowest GPAOs. So we were like, woohoo, great. And we packed up and went home for the day when we found this. So it was great. This is regardless of their general level of email engagement. Okay, it's not all roses, mostly roses, but not all roses. So here's our 11 coaches listed with our 2 different varieties of the programming course and then the math courses in the middle. So the effectiveness of the nudges did differ significantly by coach. And here we're showing the nudge effect, again, for students who are 1 standard deviation below the mean with GPAO and their non-nudge email engagement. And we see that the error bars that don't overlap 0 are those that are significant. So 7 of the 11 coaches here, I know it's a little hard to see with the black and the gray, but the error bars that don't overlap 0 are reflecting significant results. And in total, 7 out of the 11 are significant and 4 are not. We do see that a significant effect was shown at least twice in every course, which we feel like speaks to some level of generalizability of the effectiveness of these nudges. But again, 4 were not, and 3 of those 4 instances that were not significant show up in the math course. So that's prompting us to think more about the differences in the types of assignments between math and these computer science courses. Maybe the differences in the student populations, like this math course is specifically a preparatory course, whereas the 2 engineering courses are not, and so forth. Okay, this bit has to do with the element of time, essentially. So the effectiveness of the nudges differed significantly between the assignments. And this chart is showing your mean predicted score by ordinal assignment number for students who did and didn't view the nudges. And you can essentially think of this x-axis as time. So it is not the case that every course had 10 assignments, but when you model these, when you do like make the quadratic form of these when you show the quadratic form of this model, you do see this difference persisting over time, or you see this difference over time persisting across the coaches, regardless of the number of assignments that are in the course. So you can think of this as earlier versus later assignments, regardless of the number of assignments in each coach, in part because the assignments that we had in all of these coaches throughout the semesters were like evenly spaced. So it's not like the case you have 10 assignments in one course and they're all smushed up in September. They're all evenly spread out. Okay, why might this be? Well, anybody who has good intentions at the beginning of the semester can understand why nudges might be more effective as the term goes on, because it gets difficult, you get behind, you have a fresh start in the beginning of the semester. Even just basic email open rates take on the same kind of curve. Email open rates, that's different, but it's the same kind of thing. Most curves like this have kind of a steady decline as the semester goes on. Okay, the last bit of results that I'm going to show you now specifically pertain to or parse those differences between nudge 1 and nudge 2. So I said at the beginning we were aggregating over all those nudge 2 conditions, but here we're gonna separate those out. So this table is like parsing those different conditions. So up until now, we've basically been discussing conditions 1, 2, and 3 all smushed together versus conditions 4, 5, and 6 all smushed together. But those smushing all of those things together negates the fact that viewing nudge 2 might have been an effective piece of a contributing factor in what's going on here. So we're going to parse those out. And one more result slide, and then we'll sum up. Okay, so in this model, what we found is a significant relationship between viewing nudge 1 and assignment score for each condition of nudge 2. Doesn't matter what happened with respect to nudge 2. So all of the p-values here were significant, and we see the estimates as either 3% or 4% or 17%, reading down that estimate column, depending on what the condition of nudge 2 was. So what we can say is that nudge 1, regardless of what's going on with nudge 2, it's associated with higher scores. We also saw a significant relationship. This is the top line of the yellow box now. We also saw a significant relationship between viewing nudge 2 and assignment scores when nudge 1 was not viewed. And that the effect in that case was 3%. So, and in contrast, there was no effect of nudge 2 when nudge 1 was viewed. So what we said about this is that we're not seeing any cumulative effect. There's no dosage effect going on here. You get 1, and that's effective enough. If you haven't viewed nudge 1 and then you get nudge 2, that's effective enough. But there's sort of no value in like, we're not going to email these students every day. Okay, and finally, we to sort of hammer that point home, we looked at the magnitude differences in the effects of nudge 1 and nudge 2 by comparing their differences and found no significant difference. So this is again pointing to the idea that one or the other is effective enough. You don't need both. Only one dose is needed if you want. So spend a couple of minutes just summing up what we found here. So we found some positive effects of this one kind of behavioral nudge on student performance on mastery-based assessments. And particularly, we were happy to see that this was particularly strong for lower GPAO students, and particularly as the semester goes on. Again, we think this effect size is 3% might sound small, but we do think it's a pretty good win. It's a pretty low overhead cost to view an email, and we think it could make little nudges like this sort of more attractive to either instructors who are using eCoach or even just doing this kind of intervention on their own. 2 points around this are that you've surmised by this point that this is a study that was done here. It's at Michigan. Assignment scores are relatively high here, especially in general, and particularly in these courses. So in these courses, the assignment scores range somewhere between 75 and 95%. So we're dealing with a relatively motivated population. And we're also dealing with students who have relatively high GPAO. So we're kind of in like ceiling effect territory around here. This other email engagement is pretty high. Like the average student is reading 75% of these like eCoach emails. So we think that it's worth thinking about if these nudges could work better or be more substantial in another kind of setting. One of the key things in the literature around nudging and education that comes out is that personalized nudging is not very well understood yet. Like when you go to the grocery store, like maybe there's a particular fruit that you would really purchase if you saw it, that at the checkout line. Sorry, I'm going to try not to go off on fruit, which I like really. Anyway. So personalized nudging, right? This is your scores, this is your number of attempts. Improving the kind of precision and effectiveness of those nudges is like a current sort of area of research in nudging. A couple of things that we're thinking about with respect to future work is the projects. So in this case, this one says, are different techniques beneficial for assignments open for more versus fewer days? In this case, we kind of, we lumped together math and engineering, these engineering courses, But the projects in engineering are not only open for 8 days, they're open for a bit longer time frame. And so, but the same scheme, we use the same scheme here. And I think that's a bit of a limitation of what we've done. We sort of treated the deadline as like this hard and fast thing, but nobody, it's more unrealistic to start a project 5 days ahead of the due date than it is to start, a week or 2 weeks even ahead of the due date. So they are kind of different beasts in that regard. And the other thing we've been wondering about a lot, for anybody who just looks at their inbox and deletes things without opening them, that sometimes those can be attentional cues too, right? There's a sale at whatever, or, a proposal was submitted right before this and we saw the subject line and we went, oh, great, this proposal submitted, which is great. But it may be the case that students, it's muddying the waters, right? Not reading it. We are seeing a timestamp as viewed or not viewed on an email because we're not like sitting on everybody's shoulders looking over them, looking at their inbox. But we know there's ways that people behave with email that are not reflected in the data. So that's the story. That's this eCoach nudging story. So thanks for bearing with me through it. There's, it takes every paper is different, and every paper takes a village, I think, to produce. So this village is the course instructors who implemented eCoach and the nudges. There were some CRLT staff, or at CRLT at the time staff, who helped implement the nudges specifically in math, and some colleagues of mine at CAI and our faculty innovator, Timothy. So thank you all for your time and attention. We'd be happy to share any more bits that you'd like to hear about. So thanks a lot.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on why the math course seemed to have the most, or the least positive results about the nudging?
Yeah. So I do think the assignments, well, I think the student populations are more different than I might, like sometimes I just want to gloss over, like, oh, these are all large lower division introductory courses. But I think being in LSA versus being in engineering, I think, and again, sort of the preparatory nature of the course might just be that the student population is maybe they're less like responsive to their email or less like attuned to their email or something like that. The implementation of eCoach in the math course has also, to my knowledge, been a bit more variable over the 5 semesters that it was implemented. So we've gone like if a course has a bunch of, educational technologies that are kind of lined up to help support the students, it sort of matters how much the instructor talks about or doesn't talk about what any one of those given tools. So that's sort of another, like, it's another guess or hypothesis, but I don't know. We'd have to do some digging. We'd have to do some more digging to figure out why they're sort of different. And maybe even just digging within the math course, like, okay, in all of the semesters that we look over at the effects in math, where are they more significant? Where are they less significant? Can we explain that just on the basis of math itself and without bringing in kind of the complicating the other courses? Yeah.
So I think one of the results was that there was no additive effect of nudge 1 versus nudge 2. Is it possible that, like, the nudge 2 is like 2 days before the deadline, and like maybe there's no office hours before the submission? And I mean, the nudge is kind of it's a bit generic in at least like the way it was shown, like go to office hours.
Yeah.
Do you feel like maybe sending a list of when the next office hours are or what relevant resources, do you feel like that could have maybe shown additive effect?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And we do know, we certainly know at least generally when the office hours are for all of the courses for which eCoach is implemented. So adding in something that's more specific could be possible. It may even be the case, I'm not positive, but it may be the case that the office hours and like the notion of office hours was only sent with the knowledge that there were office hours on like the day in between or something. I'd have to ask like the the folks who kind of manage the content around eCoach to know that for sure. You're probably right that it's not so specific to the schedule though, and something more specific resources would be better. I think would be better. We also don't want to get into like something that's very overwhelming and has like a lot of different links and all this kind of stuff. Like in general, we do try. I think we try to keep the messaging more like there's a single action, there's a single message, there's, you know, kind of one, we try to keep the messages very clear. So, but that's a really good, that's a good suggestion for sure. Something more specific. Well, that's just one thing, yeah.
Kind of building off of that, how involved were the actual professors of the courses like in like input to the messages? Because I know like some classes the professors are like, I mainly use Piazza for problem solving versus like come to office hours.
Yeah, so and I probably should be repeating the questions now that I think about it. Or maybe the whole room is mic'd, so it doesn't matter. I don't know. In any case, the question, okay, the whole room's mic'd. So the instructors are involved with the content team at the beginning of the semester to say like, you know, and my coloring of how these conversations go, I'm not in all of them, but I think how they go, something like, what would you say to a student who isn't passing yet? What would you want them to know or do, or where would you want to point them? And so I know things like Piazza do come up in some of the tips. I didn't have them in any of the examples here, but some of those specifics do come up, like go to this like lab for office hours, or yeah. So there's a few specifics. Yeah. Yeah, Karen.
We have a question from the chat. So thanks so much. The research is so insightful. What recommendations based on your research do you have for instructors who don't use eCoach and therefore don't have built-in nudges available?
Yeah, I would say, I would say you should get eCoach. I'm just kidding. I would say, to be conservative, I guess. So I think I'm thinking about the sort of, you know, dosing is not a thing here, right? The effectiveness of nudge 2 was not evident when students had already viewed nudge 1. And so without that sort of ability to tailor on whether somebody had or had not read or viewed nudge 1, I would email a kind of message like that only once to a population. That's one thing I can think of.
Could I ask
Yeah.
a question?
Yeah.
Sorry, this is Cindy Finelli. I'm the one that asked that
Oh.
online. So I don't have eCoach in my class, but I like the idea of somehow engaging students in thinking about how to be successful with their work.
Yeah.
I don't really understand, what are you saying specifically? Is there some way that I should maybe track who is not interacting, like with Canvas maybe, and only message them once? Or what specific things do you think would be the most effective in this case?
Yeah, I think if you were going to attempt to focus on a specific subpopulation, I would focus on whoever in the course is earning lower grades. Like in terms of sending reminders, right? The intervention is sending a reminder or some series of reminders. I would focus on sending those reminders to maybe to students who are not doing as well by whatever metric that is. And I might focus on sending them only, like if I were making resource choices, I'm only going to send 2 or 3 of these. I would do it in the second half I would do it in, you know, November and December. I would not worry about September and October. So I would send them to lower performing students. I would send them to students later in the semester. And for each given assignment or for each given reminder, I would only send it once.
So for instance, track down the students that are performing less well in the class and send them a note 3 days before the 6th homework assignment is due that says,
Yeah.
hey, don't forget to spend some time working on your homework and reading the textbook.
Yeah, and if you know, you could give like sort of two pathways in that email. If you're somebody who has been trying a lot and you're having trouble, do this. If you're somebody who just hasn't started, like try to think of a time today that you could start. What's a half-hour block that you could, try to give them sort of a concrete step in. Yeah.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks.
Do you think that difference in effect where people with lower GPAs had more improvement, is that just a ceiling effect, or do you think that that's real?
Because there's not very many students with low GPAs here. You could see in the, the error bars on that chart are quite wide.
But also, like, if, I think you said that the people are getting 95% on this, it feels like the students who have a 4.0 might not have had anywhere to go, right?
Yeah, but I think that's okay. I mean, I think that's okay. Yeah, I mean, I do think ceiling effects are kind of mixed up in here, but I think that the slope on this line is like steep enough that it makes me believe that it's real enough, at least down to a GPA of 2. Beyond 2, there's very little support just because of the very small number of students, but I do think that between 2 and 4, there's enough to say, even between 3 and 4, that is different.
Another question from the chat. Do you think the differences between the effectiveness of nudges across different courses or disciplines relate to discipline-specific factors? For example, weights of related assignments, pedagogy, classroom environment, quote, rigor, etc.
Yeah, it's hard to connect all of those different elements with like, with sort of a disciplinary identity. Like, I wonder, like I just hooked into rigor there, and I don't know if I could characterize if like the rigor of mathematics is different than the rigor of a computer science course, is different than the rigor of a chemistry course, like at the disciplinary level. Certainly there are course level differences, but to connect those specifically to like a discipline writ large, I think that's a really hard task, because then you have to go beyond, right? Then you have to look at math across a wide variety of scenarios. I don't know. Do you want to read that question one more time? Actually, I might have something else about it.
Do you think the differences between the effectiveness of nudges across different courses or disciplines relate to discipline-specific factors? For example, weights of related assignments, pedagogy, classroom environment, quote, rigor, etc.
Yeah, it was one of the so a natural question for us to ask in doing this study was, did they really behave differently in math versus, were the nudges more or less effective in math versus engineering versus the 2 computer science courses? And the end there is actually, it's not big enough to statistically say that in math, the nudges are this, in this math course, the nudges are this effective, and in computer science course number 1, the nudges are this effective, and in computer science course 2, the nudges are this effective. There's not enough sample because we essentially have an N of 11, right? And then when you parse it into 3 groups, you've got 5, 3, and 3. So there's just not enough, there's not enough support in this study to really say that in course 1, the effect was A, in course 2, the effect was B, and in course C, the effect was 3, whatever I switched them. But I think that's something we'd like to do more over, we could do that in 5 years maybe, and look back over the whole corpus of data. Yeah, there's definitely, I suspect that a lot of those factors play a role. The weights of assignments and the length that they're open, and how much any given instructor encourages or doesn't encourage the use of, educational technology, eCoach or any other educational technology. They certainly all play a role for sure, I guess. Yeah.
Could you describe a little bit about the nature of these assignments that students were getting nudged about? So like, I think especially in very big introductory courses, for instance, some faculty might use like an online instant like grading software, like where that mostly what these problems were. So then they kind of already had them and the faculty didn't have to grade versus like, do you think these kinds of nudges or ways of doing this could work for maybe more open-ended assignments, or like how tricky could that be? Like those kinds of thoughts.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the philosophy around mastery-based grading is much more like feedback is central in all of those varieties of standards-based grading, mastery-based grading, alternative grading. Like the importance of feedback is just really essential in all of that. With that said, well, I don't know exactly the kinds of feedback that students were getting on these assignments from the grading systems, but they were all automatically graded assessments. These are very cut and dry, like in the math course, for example, I believe it was 5 points, 1 for each question. You have 5 questions. And I don't know the nature of the computer science projects well enough to understand how the auto grader that was being used grades them. Probably there are people in this room who know that much better than me, or at all, which would be much better than me. So yeah, I think that the nature of the reminders could be different for an assignment that's more open-ended. I wonder if they would be more effective. I think probably. I don't know why though. Yeah, I have to think about that a little more. I think there would be differences, but I'm not exactly sure right now why. What to guess, yeah. Yeah.
I think in one of the slides you were talking about like wondering if just the email subject line is like attention grabbing enough. So I tried out eCoach. There's a dissertation coach with eCoach. I didn't really engage with it, but I signed up and I got the emails. And I remember certain weeks that it was like one of the emails was like how to craft an argument, and like it was in the email line versus like I think other were kind of more generic. And I remember like that grabbed my attention, and that was like one of the emails that I actually opened.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that helps, but just wanted to reflect on that.
Yeah. So one of the things that we've been it's so okay. So with the developers that we work with, they're like, I don't know, maybe they're afraid of us or something, because we're always like, could we? What if? And they're like, that's totally impossible, or that's 700 hours of work. And we're like, but it would be really great, So we have all these ideas, and one of the ideas that we've come up wondering about is the idea of tailored subject lines. Like, what if your subject line and emoji? I really want to put emoji in. It's kind of funny and cute, but they're attention grabbing, right? Images are attention grabbing. That's like well established. That's not just, emoji are fun, which they obviously are. But what if we could tailor the subject lines? Hey, so-and-so, and like whatever little emoji you want. And usually the developers are not so happy with us when we try to suggest that. But I think we would see some really cool stuff if we could tailor the subject lines. So, a pipe dream for now. Maybe we should write a new proposal around. Yeah.
Maybe related to what he was asking. So we don't know whether people saw the headline and that reminded them already. Have you considered doing this either like for some of the assignments, but not all of the assignments, so that you can compare assignments that didn't receive nudges, or a different semester, or different classes, or is that unethical?
Yeah, I think writ large, the group would come down and say, we feel like now we've seen some benefit and we shouldn't RCT our way to, to that kind of answer. Yeah, it's hard. It's an impossible problem. Well, I don't know if it's an impossible problem. I don't know how to understand. I don't know how people study how people use email. So that's kind of a key bit in here. If we could understand more about or learn more about that might help us design something where we can be more confident that viewing equals opening and some, engagement or scrolling versus you've received this attentional cue just by like having it in your inbox.
You mentioned a few times that one of the limiting factors of this study is that most students at this school are just like incredibly high performing individuals. I recently read about a study where like specifically among high performing individuals in like academia, there's this phenomena where when they face struggle with like a class, they tend to like shy away from resources and their peers and end up kind of just like, if I just like sit down and work for 10 more hours, like maybe I'll like push through. And like kind of in some of the nudges that you were showing where it's like, don't wait until you think you can get a perfect score, just try and start. Like, sorry, the second half of that research is that when you actually take those students and make them do group work, they become like way more productive and their grades soar. So like, could there be some kind of way to like find these students who are getting these second nudges that like haven't started their assignments yet and like helping them connect and like form study groups of some kind?
That's cool. See, developers would hate that too. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really cool idea. One of the things we've been throwing around, spitballing about a little bit is the idea of helping students create study groups, specifically through problem roulette, which is a different tool, but it's more connected to like exam problems and how students are doing practicing in kind of like this points-free environment for classes. And I love the idea of saying like, hey, do you have a study group? Do you need a study group? Some other kids were also, or students were also interested in studying, acids and bases over here. And I mean, I don't know, there'd be a lot to think through there, but using the behavior in the tool to help matchmake a little bit could be really interesting. I saw you had a question too.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask if anywhere in your data set you correlated like any of the GPAO to number of attempts on the assignment or like how early something was tried or over what course of time.
Yeah, Sorry, I'll cut you off.
No, you're fine.
Adding in how early somebody started and overall their number of attempts were definitely key points of interest. And we sort of started with those in the data set. We do have access to that information. Ultimately, for simplicity, we kind of just left it at assignment score. But that was when, increasing or nudging students to start earlier and helping them increase their number of attempts were key goals of the nudges. So we'd like to look at those two.
Because especially with the mastery-based attempt, encouraging kind of multiple goes at something, I think that's a factor of like how many attempts were they trying and were the nudges making them attempt it more?
Yeah.
Interesting.
I agree. I know it's right about 3, so.
Yeah, I think we'll give another round of applause for our speakers. And thank you again for everyone for joining us today, and we hope you'll join us for our next seminar of the semester, which is on February 1st with Gerard Henderson from the University of Houston. So thanks, everybody.
And don't be a stranger. If anybody is you're interested in ed tech or, ed tech research or any aspect of what you hear about Tandem or Center for Academic Innovation, give us a holler and come visit us on Central Campus, and we'd love to see you.